She was 14 years old, and she had not cried once. Not when she found her mother face down in the snow. Not when she pulled her father's frozen hand away from her little sister's back and understood what that meant. That he had died with his body curved around his children like a shield. Not when she gathered 4 siblings in the dark and said, "We have to walk, now." Not for 12 miles through a Montana blizzard. She knocked on a stranger's door at 3 in the morning and said 6 words that broke something open in a man who had sworn he had nothing left to break. "Our parents died. We need help." If this story moves you, stay until the very last word. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this is only the beginning. The knock didn't sound like a knock. It sounded like something breaking. Caleb Stone was already awake. He was always already awake at that hour, when the dark pressed in from every side and the Montana cold came under the door like it had intentions. He was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee gone cold and both hands flat on the wood, staring at nothing the way a man stares at nothing when what he's really doing is trying not to see something that isn't there anymore. 4 years of practice, and he still wasn't good at it. The knock came again, harder. Desperate in a way that moved through the door and through the walls and into the specific hollow place in his chest that he kept carefully, deliberately empty. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled the door open. The cold hit him like a blade. She was 14 years old, standing on his porch in a coat so thin he could see her shaking through it, snow in her hair, lips the color of a bruise. She had a child on her hip, 4 years old maybe, head slack against the girl's shoulder, barely conscious. And the girl was holding that baby with her last strength. The tendons in her neck standing out, jaw locked, refusing to let go. Behind her, 4 more shapes in the dark. Small shapes, standing perfectly still, snow-covered and silent as grave markers. Caleb looked at them. He looked at the oldest girl. Her eyes were brown and completely emptied out. Not with weakness, but with the particular hollowness of someone who has seen the worst thing and is still standing, because stopping is not an option. "Our parents died," she said. Her voice didn't shake. That was the thing that hit him hardest. Everything else was shaking. Her hands, her shoulders, her legs. But her voice came out flat and steady and final. "We have nowhere left to go." 3 seconds. That was how long Caleb Stone stood in his doorway. Then he stepped back and said, "Get inside." They came in like ghosts, one by one, silent, leaving small, wet boot prints across his floor. The oldest girl first, still holding the baby tight. Then a boy of maybe 11, jaw set so hard it looked painful, eyes cutting around the room immediately, not curious, assessing, cataloging exits and threats and the measure of the man who'd opened the door. Then a girl of 9, who looked at everything with the flat, precise attention of someone taking inventory. Then the smallest boy, maybe 6, who stopped just inside the door and turned back to look out at the snow. Like he expected someone to be following, like he was still waiting. "Close the door, son," Caleb said. The boy turned, looked at him with steady, serious eyes. "My name is Eli," he said, "not son." Caleb reached past him and closed the door himself. He got the fire up without speaking. Nobody spoke while he worked. Nobody moved except to drift toward the warmth the way animals do, without thinking, without pride. The baby, the oldest girl had laid her on the rug closest to the fire, made a thin sound and curled tighter into herself. The oldest girl dropped to her knees beside her instantly, one hand to her forehead, checking her breathing, her temperature, the color of her lips. "Her name is Rose," the girl said, not looking up.
She's 4. She's not hurt, just cold.
The rest of you.
Fine.
The 11-year-old boy made a sound in the back of his throat. Caleb looked at him. You got something to say.
He said we're fine, the boy said, chin up. That means we're fine.
She said, we're fine, Caleb said. I asked you. The boy's jaw worked.
Henry, he said finally. My name is Henry, and I'm fine.
All right, Henry. Caleb looked at the 9-year-old girl, who was examining the room with that flat, measuring gaze. You.
Agnes.
She didn't look at him when she said it. She was still cataloging, eyes moving shelf to shelf.
I have a blister on my left heel.
It's not serious. I've assessed it, and it won't affect mobility. I also want to note that your firewood supply outside is approximately 40% below what it should be for this stage of winter, which is a concern, but a manageable one if we're strategic about consumption. A beat of silence. Agnes, the oldest girl said from the floor, flat, a warning. What? He should know. Caleb looked at the oldest girl. She was still crouched over Rose, one hand stroking the baby's hair with a tenderness that was completely at odds with every other thing about her. She moved like someone who had learned to keep all her softness in one place, so the rest of her could stay hard. And you, he said. She looked up at him. Dorothy, I'm the oldest. I know. Our father was Thomas Calloway. Our mother was Ruth. We were going to Oregon. She said it the way someone reads facts from a document, controlled, detached. The detachment of someone holding something at arm's length, because if they let it come close, it will destroy them. The wagon got caught in the pass above Miller's Ridge 2 nights ago. The storm was faster than we expected. My father... She stopped. Her throat moved, just once. He put all 5 of us under the canvas, him and my mother both. They kept us warm through the night. She looked back at Rose. By morning, they were gone. The fire cracked. Nobody spoke. We walked down, Dorothy continued. It took most of the day. A woman in town, Mrs. McAllister at the boarding house, she said she was sorry, but she didn't have room. She said maybe the rancher in the North Road had a barn. Something moved across her face, brief and uncontrolled, gone before he could read it. She said maybe you'd let us stay one night. One night. Caleb looked at the 5 of them. Rose unconscious on his rug. Eli at the window, watching the dark outside with those solemn 6-year-old eyes. Agnes standing in the middle of his kitchen, running calculations in her head. Henry, against the wall, arms crossed, doing everything in his power to look like he didn't need a single thing from anyone. Dorothy, on her knees, with her spine straight and her hands steady, and all 5 of them, waiting. You eaten? He asked. Agnes turned immediately. Not since yesterday morning. Do you have potatoes? The caloric density of potatoes relative to their storage requirements makes them the most... Agnes, Dorothy's voice. What? It's a relevant question. Agnes looked at Caleb. It is a relevant question. I know it is, Caleb said. Come sit down. He made eggs and salt pork and cornbread. He made more than enough. Set it on the table and stepped back and didn't watch them eat, because some things a person deserves to do without being observed. He stood at the window and looked at the snow coming down again, heavy and relentless, and listened to the sounds of 5 children eating. He hadn't realized how much silence could have a shape until sound came in to replace it. Eli climbed into the chair closest to where Caleb had been sitting. He looked at the cold coffee on the table. He looked at Caleb. You weren't sleeping, he said. Not a question. No. Me neither. Not since... He looked at his plate, pushed an egg around. Since... I know, Caleb said. Do you? Eli looked up at him with those steady, serious eyes. Did your mama die too? Dorothy's head came up. Eli? It's all right, Caleb said. He pulled out the chair across from Eli and sat down. Not my mama. My wife. 4 years ago. Eli absorbed this. Does it feel like a hole? The room went quiet. Even Agnes stopped calculating. Yeah, Caleb said. It feels like a hole. Eli nodded slowly. He pressed his small fist against the center of his chest. Right here. Like something got taken out, and the cold got in where it used to be. He looked at Caleb. That's what it feels like now. I know it does. Does it stop? Caleb thought about lying. It would have been easy. Would have been the kind thing, maybe. The thing a person says to a 6-year-old in the dark. It changes, he said. That's the honest answer. It changes. Eli thought about that seriously, the way he seemed to think about everything. Then he nodded and picked up his fork and went back to eating, apparently satisfied with an honest answer over a comfortable one. Dorothy was watching Caleb from across the table. He felt it before he saw it, that measuring, careful attention. When he looked at her, she looked away, but not before he caught it. The slight adjustment of her expression, something recalculated. After they ate, he moved them to the back room. Blankets from the cedar chest his wife had brought from Missouri. He spread them without comment and didn't apologize for the floor, because apologies implied he thought it wasn't enough. And it wasn't enough. But it was what he had. Henry carried Rose without being asked. That told Caleb everything about who this family was and how they'd organized themselves for survival. Who carried what? Who watched what? Who held the seams when everything threatened to come apart? He watched Henry lay the baby down on the blankets with careful, deliberate hands and thought, this boy has been doing that for 2 days, carrying what needed carrying, not because anyone asked, because someone had to. Dorothy was last through the door. She stopped in the frame, one hand on the wood. Thank you, she said. The words came out careful, like something valuable being handled with both hands. Like gratitude was a thing she'd had to learn to say, because it didn't come naturally to someone who'd been taught to solve her own problems. One night, Caleb said. She looked at him. That look, dark and emptied and older than any 14-year-old had a right to be. I know, she said. I know what one night means. He turned before she could see anything on his face he wasn't ready to show. He sat at the table until the sounds from the back room went quiet. Until Rose stopped rustling, and Eli stopped whispering, and Henry's deliberate, controlled breathing finally evened out into sleep. Until Dorothy, last of all, stopped moving. Then he put on his coat and went out to the barn. The cold outside was a different thing than cold inside. Inside, cold was something to manage. Outside cold, in Montana, in the deep of winter, was something else entirely. It was a presence, a weight, something with intent. It pressed against his face and found the gaps in his coat and worked its way in, patient and thorough. He stood in the barn doorway for a moment, just feeling it. Those children had walked through that for 12 miles. After 2 nights in a snowpass with dead parents. 5 of them. The oldest one, 14. He pressed the heel of his hand against the barn door frame until he felt the cold of the wood through his glove. Then he went in and checked the horses and stood in the dark for a while, doing nothing in particular. He was in the barn when Sheriff Dale Whitfield rode up the lane at first light. Caleb came out to meet him before he reached the house. Whitfield dismounted, boots punching through the top crust of snow, and looked at the house and then at Caleb with the careful eyes of a man who had spent 20 years making sure his expression never showed what he was actually thinking. "Heard you had company," Whitfield said. "News travels fast." Mrs. McAllister feels guilty. Guilty women talk. He nodded toward the house. "How many?" "5. 4 to 14. Whitfield took his hat off, held it in both hands. Good Lord! Their parents froze on Miller's Ridge. Children walked down yesterday. "I know. I've got 2 men riding up there now." A pause. "To bring them down proper, for burial." Caleb said nothing, just nodded once. "Here's the situation," Whitfield said, and his voice shifted into the tone of a man who is about to say something he doesn't enjoy saying. 5 orphaned children with no listed kin, no legal guardian, no papers naming anyone responsible for their welfare. That's not a situation I can look away from, Caleb. That's a situation the territorial court has opinions about." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that involve a church home in Helena, organized, staffed, set up specifically for—" "You ever been to one of those homes, Dale?" Whitfield's jaw moved. "No." "Then don't tell me it's set up for them." Caleb held his gaze. "They walked 12 miles through a blizzard after watching their parents die. They knocked on my door. I opened it. He said it simply, no performance in it. I ain't putting them in a wagon to Helena." Whitfield studied him for a long moment. The wind came up between them, sharp and cutting. "You understand what you're saying," Whitfield said. "Single man, no wife, no family. 5 children. The court will have things to say." "Let them say it. You could lose." "I know. And then those children get put in the Helena home anyway, except now they've been moved twice, and they've had someone ripped away from them twice." Whitfield's voice was hard and deliberate, and it was the voice of a man who was trying to make someone see something painful before it was too late. "Think about what that does to a child, Caleb. Having something and losing it. That's worse than never having it." Something moved across Caleb's face. The kind of movement that happens when a carefully aimed thing lands exactly where it was aimed. He was quiet for a moment. "Talk to your judge," he said finally. "File what you have to file. I'll deal with it." Whitfield studied him one more time. Then he put his hat back on. "I'll give you a week before I make it official. Use it." He gathered his reins. "And Caleb, if those children don't want to stay, if the girl decides she'd rather take her chances somewhere else, you can't hold them. You understand me?" "I'd never hold them." "All right." He turned his horse. "All right." Caleb watched him ride out until the snow swallowed him up. Then he went back inside. Dorothy was at the kitchen window. She had her back to the room, both hands wrapped around a cup of water, watching the sheriff's tracks disappear into white. She didn't turn when Caleb came in. She'd heard every word. He knew that. She knew he knew. "We're not going to Helena," she said. Her voice was quiet. Quiet the way a decision is quiet. Final and without heat. "I know." "My mother's cousin grew up in a place like that." She paused. "She talked about it once. Just once. That was enough." Caleb hung his coat. "You're not going anywhere like that." Dorothy turned then, looked at him full on, and the measuring thing was back in her eyes, that constant, exhausting calculation of whether the person in front of her was someone worth trusting, or just the latest in a long series of adults who meant well and fell short. "Why?" she said. It wasn't a challenge, it was a real question. Maybe the most important one she'd ever asked. Caleb thought about a dozen answers. All of them were true. None of them were complete. "Because you knocked," he said, "and I opened the door. And now we're here."
He looked at her. "That's enough reason for me. Is it enough for you?" A long beat. Dorothy looked down at the cup in her hands. Something moved through her face. A wave of something she caught and pressed back down before it could reach the surface. Her shoulders held. Her spine held. Everything held. But he saw it. That moment before she caught it.
That split second, when 14 years old and utterly alone, looked out from behind her eyes before she pulled the door shut again. "For now," she said. Quiet. Honest. "It's enough for now." It was the most he could have asked for. It was more than he'd expected. "All right," he said. "You want to help. Wake the others. Breakfast in 20 minutes. She was already moving down the hall before he finished the sentence. Agnes came in first, boot in her hand, examining her heel blister with the focused attention of a field surgeon. She sat at the table, pulled out a piece of brown paper she'd found somewhere, he would never know where, and set it in front of him without preamble. "I inventoried your pantry." Caleb looked at the paper. It was a complete, itemized list in small, neat handwriting. Quantities, estimated duration, nutritional deficiencies noted in a separate column. 3 weeks of cornmeal, Agnes said, pointing. 2 weeks of salt pork. Coffee is fine. You have no vegetables, which means scurvy becomes a risk after approximately 6 weeks of... Agnes. He picked up the paper and looked at her. "When did you do this?" "Before everyone woke up. I couldn't sleep." She met his eyes, perfectly matter-of-fact. "Inventory is calming. Some people breathe. I count things." Caleb set the paper down. "Your mother teach you that?" Agnes went still, just for a second. Just 1 second where the practical, cataloging expression cracked, and something younger and softer looked out. "Yes," she said. And then the crack closed. She said a woman who can count and plan will never be at anyone's mercy. She was right. Agnes looked at him. Really looked at him. Maybe for the first time. "You also need more candles," she said. "Significantly more." "I'll add it to the list." "I already added it to the list." She pointed to the bottom of the paper. Henry came in from outside, stamping snow off his boots, carrying an armload of firewood from the stack behind the barn. He dropped it by the stove without looking at anyone, without saying anything. The careful performance of a boy doing a necessary thing for purely practical reasons that had nothing to do with wanting to be useful, nothing to do with wanting to be seen. "Stack was bigger than I could carry," he said to the floor. "More out there." "We'll get the rest after breakfast," Caleb said. "Together." Henry's head came up a fraction, at that one word. He looked at Caleb for just a moment, not long enough to seem like it mattered, and then looked back down. "Sure," he said. Eli came in holding Clara's lead rope, which he absolutely should not have had, which meant he had been in the barn alone with the horses at 6 years old, in the dark and the cold, which meant Caleb needed to establish some ground rules. Except that Eli was holding the rope with completely natural competence, Clara following behind him with her ears forward and her eyes soft. Caleb stared at him. "She was lonely," Eli said simply. "I could hear her from the back room. She makes a sound when she's lonely. Did you know that?" "I knew that," Caleb said. "How did you know that?" Eli looked at the mare. "Some things you just hear," he said, "if you're paying attention." He led Clara back to her stall with the rope and the patience of a boy who had clearly been around horses before. And Caleb stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him go, and felt something shift in the back of his mind that he didn't have a name for yet. Rose woke up while he was making breakfast. She sat up in the middle of the kitchen floor, blanket around her shoulders, and looked at him with wide brown eyes that were completely and utterly her mother's. He didn't know that yet, but Dorothy would tell him weeks later, and when she did, he would have to leave the room.
And without any preamble, without any caution, without any of the careful, measured distance that every single one of her siblings had built around themselves, she held up both arms, just like that. Total, unconditional. The absolute trust of a 4-year-old who has not yet been taught that trust is a thing that has to be earned. Caleb Stone stood in his kitchen and looked at those small raised arms. He thought about 4 years, about a life carefully constructed around the principle that nothing should matter enough to hurt when it was gone, about the specific, deliberate work of hollowing yourself out until the cold had nothing left to find. He crossed the room. He picked her up. Rose put her head on his shoulder. She made a small sound, one exhale, like she'd been holding her breath all morning and had finally decided she didn't need to anymore. Her small fist closed around the collar of his flannel shirt. Dorothy was in the hall doorway. She looked at Caleb holding her baby sister. Something crossed her face, something fast and uncontrolled and real, completely unlike every other expression he'd seen from her. And she turned away quickly, walked back to the window, stood there with her back to the room. Her shoulders were shaking. Just once, just for a second. Then they stopped. She did not turn around until she was sure they had. Caleb held Rose and said nothing. Outside, the snow came down harder. He stood at his kitchen window that evening, Rose asleep in the back room, all 5 children finally quiet, and looked out at the white dark and felt the weight of what was coming settle onto him like the snow settled onto everything. Slowly, completely, without asking permission. The judge in Billings, the territorial court, the church home in Helena. 1 week, Whitfield had said. Caleb pressed his palm flat against the cold glass. Then he turned away from the window, went to the small desk in the corner where he kept his papers, and pulled out a blank sheet. He sat down. He uncapped the ink. He sat there for a long time. Then he began to write. The letter he wrote that night was not to the court in Billings. It was to a lawyer named Gerald Fitch, who operated out of a cramped office above the feed store on Main Street, and was, by all accounts, the only man in Coldwater Creek who understood territorial law well enough to be useful, and honest enough not to pretend he understood more than he did. Caleb had met him twice, had no particular opinion of him either way. But Whitfield had mentioned his name once in passing. If you ever need someone who'll give it to you straight. And straight was what Caleb needed right now. He sealed the letter before he could change his mind about what he'd put in it. Then he sat at the desk for a while longer, with his hands flat on the wood, and listened to the sounds of 5 children sleeping under his roof, and tried to figure out what exactly he thought he was doing. He didn't arrive at an answer, but by morning he had decided that the absence of an answer was not the same as a reason to stop. He rode into town at first light, before the children were up, leaving the note on the kitchen table that said, "Back before breakfast. Firewood needs stacking. Henry." He wasn't sure why he addressed it specifically to Henry. He just did. Fitch read the letter standing up, which told Caleb something about the man. He didn't sit down and make a production of it. He just read it, set it on the desk, and looked at Caleb with the particular expression of someone who is deciding how much bad news to deliver at once. "You want guardianship of 5 children," Fitch said. "I want to know if it's possible." "It's possible. It's also complicated." Fitch sat down then and laced his fingers together on the desk. "Territorial court requires documentation, proof of stable income, suitable living arrangements, character references from people of standing. And Caleb," he paused, "you're a single man, no wife. The court's going to look at that hard." "I know. They're going to look at a bachelor rancher trying to raise a 14-year-old girl and 3 other children,
And they are going to have questions that have nothing to do with whether you're a decent man and everything to do with appearances and what the law considers proper.
I know that too. Fitch studied him. Then why are you here? Caleb looked at him. Because knowing something's going to be hard isn't the same as a reason not to do it. He held Fitch's gaze. Tell me what I need. Fitch was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up a pen. The list he gave Caleb was longer than he'd expected and shorter than he'd feared. 3 character references from people of standing: landowners, clergy, business proprietors. A formal accounting of income and assets. A written statement of intent outlining how he planned to provide for the children's physical, moral, and educational welfare.
A home visit from a court-appointed assessor who would inspect the living situation and file a report. And Dorothy Calloway, Fitch said, setting the pen down. She's 14, old enough that the court will want her testimony. What she says will matter.
Caleb was quiet. You think she'll cooperate? Fitch asked. I think she'll say what she believes, Caleb said. I'm working on making sure what she believes is the truth. He rode back to the ranch with the list folded in his coat pocket and found Henry in the yard, stacking firewood with the focused, mechanical intensity of a boy who had given himself a task specifically so he wouldn't have to think. He'd stacked it wrong. The logs needed to be offset for air circulation, or the snow melt would rot the bottom layer. But he'd stacked a considerable amount of it, and the yard looked considerably less like a disaster than it had that morning. Caleb dismounted, stood next to Henry, looked at the stack.
You got the wrong offset, he said. Henry's jaw tightened. I know how to stack wood. You know how to stack wood for Kansas. Montana winter is different. Snow gets into the stack differently, melts differently. The bottom layer rots faster if you don't account for, I said I know how to stack wood. Henry dropped the log he was holding. It hit the frozen ground with a crack. You don't have to correct everything I do. Caleb looked at him. I'm not correcting you. I'm teaching you. Same thing. No, Caleb said. It ain't. He picked up the log Henry had dropped and held it out. There's a difference between telling someone they're wrong and telling someone how to do something better. One of those means you failed. The other one means you're learning. He waited. You want to learn, or you want to be right? Henry stared at the log. His throat worked. He took it. Show me, he said, like it cost him something. They restacked half the pile together before breakfast. Caleb showed him the offset pattern without making a speech about it, just demonstrated twice, and then let Henry do it himself. And Henry did it correctly the second time, and didn't say anything about that either. But the set of his shoulders changed. Very slightly, the way a bowstring changes when the tension finally finds its proper level. Inside, Agnes had made coffee. This was alarming on several levels, not least of which was that the result was actually quite good, which meant she had done it before, which meant her parents had let a 9-year-old make coffee, which told him something about the Calloway household that he filed away without comment. She slid a cup across the table to him when he came in. I also revised the inventory to account for 2 additional weeks of occupancy, she said. We need to prioritize acquiring root vegetables within the next 4 days, before the next storm system moves in. I've identified which homesteads, within reasonable distance, might have winter stores they'd be willing to trade for labor or goods. Caleb sat down and looked at her over the coffee cup. How do you know a storm is coming in 4 days? Agnes looked at him like this was a simple question. The pressure changed this morning. The way sound carries has shifted. The horses were restless last night. I heard them from the back room. These are all consistent indicators of an incoming low-pressure system. My father taught me.
She said that last part in the same tone she used for everything else, factual and direct, and it landed the same way everything else about this family landed, like a small stone dropped into still water. You didn't always see the ripple right away. You always felt it. Dorothy came in from outside with Rose on her hip and snow on her boots, and a look on her face that said she had been standing outside for longer than the cold should have allowed, which meant she had needed the outside more than she'd needed warmth. Caleb had learned that about her in 2 days. She went outside when she needed to hold herself together. The cold helped. He understood that better than he wanted to. "There's a woman at the gate," Dorothy said. Caleb stood. "What woman?" "Older. Nice coat." She said her name was Constance Hale. Dorothy shifted Rose to her other hip. Her voice was carefully neutral. "She has a basket." Caleb was already moving toward the door. Constance Hale was 52 years old and had been the most important woman in Coldwater Creek for 30 years, by virtue of being smarter than everyone around her and patient enough not to make them feel bad about it. Her husband owned the largest cattle operation in the territory. She ran it. Everyone knew this. No one said it directly. It was that kind of arrangement. She was standing at the fence in a wool coat the color of charcoal, a covered basket on her arm, looking at the house with an expression that was impossible to read from a distance. "Constance," Caleb said. "Caleb." She looked past him at the doorway where Dorothy had appeared with Rose. Her expression did something complicated and then settled. "I heard." "I imagine most of town heard by now." "Most of town is talking about it in ways I find unproductive." She held out the basket. "I brought bread and a smoked ham and 2 jars of pickled carrots. The carrots are important. I understand you have no vegetables." Caleb took the basket. "Agnes told you." "Agnes sent me a note." She said this without inflection. "She slipped it under the door of my husband's office in town this morning." It contained a detailed summary of current supply deficiencies and a specific request for root vegetables, with a brief explanation of scurvy prevention that I found both alarming and impressive. She looked at him. "That child is remarkable." "She is." "They all are, from what I can see." Constance's eyes moved to the doorway again. Dorothy was still standing there, watching this exchange with that flat, measuring attention she applied to everything. Rose had buried her face in Dorothy's neck. Constance stepped forward until she was close enough to address Dorothy directly, which most people didn't do. Most people talked at children, or around them, or about them. She looked at Dorothy straight on, and spoke to her like she was speaking to a person. "My name is Constance Hale," she said. "I knew your father slightly. He traded at my husband's post last spring on his way through. He haggled well and paid fair." She paused. "He spoke about his children. He was proud." Something happened to Dorothy's face. The careful, composed surface of it fractured for just a second. A hairline crack, barely visible, there and gone so fast that if Caleb hadn't been watching for it, he would have missed it entirely. She pressed her lips together. Her chin held. "Thank you for telling me that," Dorothy said. Her voice was exactly steady. "I thought you should know." Constance looked at Caleb. "I'd like to help, whatever you need. Character witness, references, a voice in this town that people listen to." Her voice was matter-of-fact about this last part. The way people are matter-of-fact about things they know to be true. "The court will pay attention to what my husband and I say. I intend to say the right things." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. Constance looked at him. "Because those children walked 12 miles in a Montana blizzard and knocked on a door, and the door opened." She said it simply. "That's worth protecting." She left 20 minutes later. Caleb stood in the kitchen with a basket on the table and Dorothy across from him.
Rose, now asleep in the back room, and the weight of the week ahead pressing down on both of them, in different ways. "She means it," Dorothy said. She wasn't asking. "I think she does." "People say things and then they don't mean them." She looked at the basket. "People say all kinds of things." "I know." "You said one night." She looked at him. "That first night. You said one night." "I know what I said." "And now you're writing letters to lawyers and talking to important women about character references?" Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was careful, like she was handling something that might break. "What changed?" Caleb set his hands flat on the table. He thought about the answer for a long moment, because it deserved a real one. "Rose held up her arms," he said. Dorothy stared at him. "That's the honest answer," he said. "Your sister held up her arms, and I picked her up, and I understood something I hadn't understood before." He held Dorothy's gaze. "I can't undo knowing it." Dorothy looked down at the table. The silence stretched. Outside, the wind moved through the eaves, and the cold pressed in at the windows. And somewhere, in the back room, Eli was talking to himself in the low, private murmur of a 6-year-old working something out. "What if it doesn't work?" she said, quietly, like she was asking herself as much as him. "What if you do all of this, and the court says no, and they send us to Helena anyway? What if—" She stopped. Her jaw worked. "What if we let ourselves—" She stopped again. Couldn't finish it. Caleb understood what she was trying to say. What if we let ourselves believe this is real? What if we stop holding ourselves at a distance and let this matter? What if we do that, and then it gets taken away, and we've lost everything, twice? "Then we'll know we tried," he said. "And trying matters, even when it doesn't work." "That's not very comforting." "No," he said. "It ain't." She was quiet for a long time. "My mother used to say that the only way to live without fear was to accept that everything you love will eventually be lost. And love it anyway." Dorothy set it to the table, to the grain of the wood. "I thought I understood what she meant." Her voice dropped. "I didn't understand what she meant." Caleb didn't say anything. He sat across from this 14-year-old girl who had buried her parents in the snow and walked 12 miles and hadn't cried yet, and he let her have the silence she needed to say a hard thing out loud. "I'm scared," Dorothy said, very quietly. "I know I don't act scared. I know what I act like. But I'm scared all the time, and I don't know how to stop, and I don't know how to do this, and I—" Her voice broke, just once. Just that one syllable, cracked clean through. She pressed her lips together, hard. "I don't know how to do this without them." "You don't have to know yet," Caleb said. She looked up at him. "You've been holding everything together since the moment you walked down that ridge," he said. "You've been holding Henry together, and Agnes together, and Eli together, and Rose together, and you haven't put anything down once. Not once." He held her gaze. "You don't have to hold everything together in this house. I'm asking you to let me take some of the weight." Dorothy's eyes were bright. She wasn't going to cry. He was beginning to understand that about her, that she had made a decision about crying that was deeper than habit. But the brightness was there, the pressure of everything she was holding back, right there at the surface. "You don't even know us," she said. "I know enough." "You knew us for 2 days." "Dorothy." He said her name the way her father might have said it. Not as a correction, not as a command, just as a weight, as a recognition. "I see you. I know enough." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and picked up the jar of pickled carrots from the basket and turned it over in her hands. An ordinary thing to do. A necessary thing, maybe. Something to hold.
something concrete, while the rest of her recalibrated. "Agnes will want to add these to the inventory list," she said. "I expect she will. She's already going to be insufferable about being right about the vegetables." "Probably." The corner of Dorothy's mouth moved, just barely, not quite a smile. The shadow of one, the suggestion of one. A 14-year-old girl with the weight of 5 lives on her shoulders, finding, for just a second, a crack of something lighter. "All right," she said. She set the jar down. She looked at him with those emptied-out brown eyes that had something small and careful and new beginning to move behind them. "All right, what do you need me to do?" Caleb reached into his coat and laid Fitch's list on the table between them. "I need you to be yourself in front of a judge," he said. "Exactly the same as you are right now. Nothing more." Dorothy looked at the list. She read it. Her face stayed still and composed and gave away nothing. But he watched her chest rise and fall, once, with the kind of breath people take when they're preparing for something they're afraid of, but have decided to walk toward anyway. She looked up. "I can do that," she said. Henry appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, stamping snow off his boots, back from his second run at the woodpile. He looked at both of them, looked at the list on the table, looked at Caleb. "What is that?" he said. "Plan," Caleb said. "What kind of plan?" "The kind that keeps you here." Henry stared at him. That controlled, contained face. The face of a boy who had learned so thoroughly not to want things that even his wanting had learned to hide. He looked at the list. He looked at Dorothy, who gave him the smallest nod. Henry looked back at Caleb. "What do you need?" he said. Outside, the snow had started again. Quiet and steady, and without mercy, the way Montana winter worked. Not in sudden violence, but in slow, relentless accumulation, covering everything, pressing everything down, transforming the world into something that required entirely different rules to survive. Inside, in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and smoked ham and wet wool drying by the fire, a man and 5 children began, carefully and without ceremony, to build something that none of them had a name for yet. Fitch had told Caleb he needed 3 character references. What he hadn't told him was that getting them would feel like standing in front of a firing squad and asking each man to lower his rifle one at a time. The first was Reverend Thomas Birch. Caleb rode to the church on a Tuesday morning, hat in hand, and found Birch in the small room behind the altar, where he kept his books and his correspondence, and his carefully maintained sense of how the world ought to work. Birch was a thin man with sharp eyes and the particular quality of stillness that came from spending a great deal of time in rooms where people confessed things. He looked at Caleb for a long moment before he said anything. "I heard about the Calloway children," he said. "Most people have." "I heard about your intentions." "Then you know why I'm here." Birch set his pen down. "I know what you're asking for. I'm not certain I know what I think about it." He laced his fingers together on the desk. "You're not a church-going man, Caleb." "No, sir, I'm not. You haven't attended a single service in the 3 years you've been in this territory." "That's true. And yet you're asking me to stand before a territorial court and vouch for your moral fitness to raise 5 children." Birch's voice wasn't unkind. It was precise, like a man who has learned to separate what he feels from what he says. "You understand why I might have hesitation." "I do," Caleb said. "I'm not asking you to vouch for my church attendance. I'm asking you to vouch for my character. Those are 2 different things." Birch looked at him steadily. "Are they?" "My wife used to say that the most religious thing a person could do was show up when it mattered." Caleb held his gaze. I'm trying to show up, Reverend. I'm asking you to decide whether that counts for something. A long silence. Bring the children to service on Sunday, Birch said finally. All 5. Let me see them. Let me see you with them. He picked up his pen again. If what I see convinces me that those children are in the care of a man worth endorsing, I will sign your paper. Caleb nodded. Sunday. And Caleb, Birch looked up. Come early. The back pew has a draft. The second name on Fitch's list was Robert Aldridge, who owned the Coldwater Creek Mercantile and had a reputation for being the kind of man who kept a careful account of everything he gave and everything he received, and who rarely gave more than he expected to receive in return. Caleb knew him the way you know a man you've done business with for 3 years, well enough to trust his word on a trade, not well enough to know what he was made of underneath. He found him behind the counter, tallying receipts, and he said what he needed without dressing it up. Aldridge listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, Aldridge set his pencil down and looked at him with the flat, assessing eyes of a man running numbers. Single man, 5 children, no wife, Aldridge said.
That's what you're asking me to stand behind?
I'm asking you to stand behind the truth, which is that I'm honest, I pay my debts, and I've never given you reason to doubt my word. Business character and fathering character are different things. They're built from the same material, Caleb said. A man who keeps his word in trade keeps his word to children, too. Aldridge was quiet. He turned the pencil over in his fingers once, twice. You know what people are saying. I know. Margaret Hastings came in here 2 days ago and talked for 20 minutes about propriety and appearances and what it means for the reputation of this town if a bachelor rancher is allowed to— Margaret Hastings, Caleb said, has never walked 12 miles through a blizzard with a 4-year-old on her hip. I don't put much stock in her opinion on survival. Something shifted in Aldridge's expression. Not quite a smile. The shadow of something that had considered being a smile, and then thought better of it. I'll think on it, Aldridge said. That's all I'm asking. He was almost to the door when Aldridge spoke again. My wife lost 2 children, he said, before they were old enough to walk. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't done then. A pause. She still doesn't sleep some nights. His voice was careful and flat in the way of someone saying a hard thing in the only way they know how to say it, stripped of all ornamentation. Those Calloway children lost their parents in the snow. I don't think they should lose anything else if someone's willing to stand in the way of that. Caleb turned. I'll have the statement to your lawyer by Thursday, Aldridge said. He picked up his pencil. Don't make me regret it. Constance Hale signed without being asked a second time. She had the document ready when Caleb came to call. Written in a hand so precise and authoritative, it looked like it had already been notarized by the simple force of her conviction. I wrote it myself, she said, handing it to him on the porch. Gerald Fitch can confirm the language is legally appropriate. I've reviewed territorial guardianship proceedings before. She said this without explanation, and Caleb didn't ask for one. How are the children? Holding, he said. Dorothy? Holding hardest. Constance was quiet for a moment. She reminds me of myself at that age. The kind of girl who decides that needing someone is the most dangerous thing in the world, and proceeds to need no one, perfectly, until it nearly kills her. She looked at Caleb. Be patient with her. The walls she's built are load-bearing. You can't take them down all at once, or everything collapses. I know. Do you know because you understand it, or because you've lived it? Caleb looked at her. Both. Constance nodded once, like that was the answer she'd expected. Then you know how to do this, she said. You've already done the harder half. He rode home with 3 signatures in his coat pocket, and the specific precarious feeling of a man who has done everything he can do and now has to wait to find out if it was enough. Sunday came gray and cold, the sky low and heavy with the promise of more snow. Caleb got the children ready with the careful, slightly panicked efficiency of a man who had never dressed 5 children for church and was discovering that the process had layers of complexity he had not anticipated. Agnes announced she was wearing her blue dress, which had a torn hem, which she had already repaired using thread she'd located in a sewing box she'd inventoried on her 3rd day in the house.
Henry refused to wear the collar on his shirt for 7 minutes before Dorothy said 3 words to him in a voice too low for Caleb to hear, after which he put the collar on without further discussion. Eli wanted to bring Clara's lead rope to church, which was declined, and wanted to know whether God liked horses, which Caleb said he was fairly sure was yes. Rose wore a wool dress Constance had sent over the day before, deep red, with buttons down the front, and when Dorothy saw her in it, she turned and walked to the window and stood there for 30 seconds, doing something Caleb had come to recognize as her version of crying. All internal, no external evidence, the complete opposite of what crying looked like in a person who allowed themselves the release of it. He walked to the window and stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. After a moment, she said, "That was Mama's color. Red." Her voice was perfectly steady. She always said Rose would look beautiful in it.
"She does," Caleb said. Dorothy nodded. "Yes," she said. "She does." She turned back to the room. "Let's go." The church was full. In a town the size of Coldwater Creek, in the middle of winter, there wasn't a great deal of competition for Sunday morning entertainment, and the news that Caleb Stone was bringing the 5 Calloway orphans to service had apparently reached everyone by Saturday evening. People turned to look when they came in. Some of the looks were kind. Some were something else. Caleb didn't look back at any of them. He led the children to the pew Birch had specified, and sat down, and kept his eyes forward. Eli leaned over immediately and whispered, "Why is everyone looking at us?" "Because they don't have anything better to do," Henry muttered. "Henry," Dorothy said. "It's true." "It's also not helpful." Agnes, who had been examining the church with her customary inventory expression, leaned toward Caleb.
"The structural integrity of this building is questionable," she whispered. "The east wall has visible separation at the—"
"Agnes," 4 voices said simultaneously. Agnes sat back. "I'm just noting it," she whispered. Birch's sermon was about sheltering strangers. Caleb didn't know if this was intentional or coincidental, and he decided it didn't matter either way. What mattered was that halfway through the service, Rose climbed into his lap without asking, arranged herself with the authority of someone who has decided a thing is done, and fell asleep against his chest. And Birch, from the pulpit, looked at that, and something moved through his face. Something private and not intended to be seen, but Caleb caught it. After the service, in the yard, Birch came to them directly. He crouched down to the children's level, one by one. Not condescendingly, not performatively, but with the genuine attention of a man who understood that children were people worth the effort of meeting eye to eye. He asked Henry what he was good at. He asked Agnes what she was learning. He asked Eli what he thought God's favorite animal was. And Eli said horses, probably, but maybe also dogs. And Birch said that seemed reasonable. Then he stood and looked at Dorothy. "Your father spoke about you," he said. "He stopped here once, 2 springs ago, on his way up toward the pass. He talked about his oldest daughter. Said she was going to move mountains one day." He held her gaze. I think he was right. Dorothy pressed her lips together. "Thank you, Reverend," she said. Birch looked at Caleb. "I'll have the statement to Fitch by tomorrow," he said. "For what it's worth, I think those children are exactly where they should be." Caleb said nothing.
But what happened in his chest at that moment was something he hadn't felt in 4 years. The specific warmth of being seen clearly by another person and found to be acceptable. Not impressive, not remarkable, just acceptable. Just enough. The week that followed was the closest thing to ordinary that any of them had known since the snow. Henry worked with the horses every morning. He didn't ask permission anymore. He just appeared in the barn before Caleb got there. Clara already brushed, the other horses seen to. A focused and deliberate presence that asked nothing except to be allowed to keep doing what he was doing. Caleb started explaining things to him without being asked. The weight distribution on a shoe, the way you could read a horse's mood from the set of its ears, the difference between skittish and mean. Henry listened with the fierce, hungry attention of a boy absorbing information he knew he was going to need. One morning, Henry asked him, not looking up from the hoof he was inspecting, "Did you always know how to do this?" "No," Caleb said. "My father taught me. His father taught him." Henry was quiet for a moment. "My father was going to teach me farming. Oregon farming." He set the hoof down carefully. "I don't know anything about Oregon." "Montana's better anyway." Henry looked at him sideways. "You don't know that." "I've been here 15 years. I've never left. That's a recommendation." The corner of Henry's mouth moved, just barely. "That might just mean you're stubborn." "Might be both things," Caleb said. Agnes continued to run the household inventory with the efficiency of a very small, very serious general. She renegotiated the root vegetable supply by writing Constance Hale a second note, this one accompanied by a detailed analysis of current consumption rates and a projection for the remainder of winter, and received in return a crate of carrots and parsnips and 3 turnips, along with a personal note from Constance that said simply, "You are extraordinary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Agnes read the note twice, folded it, and put it in her coat pocket, where she kept the important things. She did not comment on it. But she read it again that night, when she thought no one was watching, which Caleb saw through the kitchen doorway, and said nothing about. Eli talked to the horses every day, and to Caleb with the frequency of a person who has been storing up questions for 6 years, and has finally found someone patient enough to receive them all. He wanted to know why snow was white when water was clear, why horses had 4 legs and people only had 2, whether the stars were different in Oregon than in Montana, whether God could hear you better in a church or in a barn. "Barn," Caleb said on that last one. Eli nodded solemnly. "I thought so too. It's quieter, easier to hear things in the quiet." Rose had decided that Caleb was hers, in the particular, absolute way that 4-year-olds decide things, which meant she appeared at his elbow at various points throughout the day, for no apparent reason, confirmed his continued presence, and then went back to whatever she was doing. She had also, in the past week, learned to say his name, which she pronounced Kayeb, and which she deployed with an authority that suggested she understood it was a word with significant power. Dorothy was harder. Not unkind, not cold, but careful in the way of someone who is allowing something to matter that she is not yet certain she should be allowing to matter. She helped with everything, cooking, cleaning, watching the younger ones, without being asked and without apparent resentment. But there was still a quality to her help that felt like it was being offered on provisional terms, like she was prepared at any moment to take it back. Caleb gave her space. He had learned that pushing Dorothy accomplished nothing except making her walls thicker. But on a Thursday night, 10 days after they'd arrived, he was sitting at the desk after the children were in bed, going through the papers Fitch had sent back for review, when he heard her. She was in the kitchen.
He could hear the sounds of her moving, the stove, the water barrel, the small domestic rhythms she'd adopted without comment. Then he heard something else, a sound so small he almost missed it, a sound she would have been mortified to know he heard.
She was crying, not the way she cried in front of people, which was to say, not at all. This was the other kind, the kind that happens when a person has been holding something so long that their body simply takes over regardless of what their mind has decided. It was quiet and controlled even now, but it was real, and it was hers. And he sat at the desk and did not move, and did not call out, and let her have it. After a while it stopped. The kitchen sounds resumed, ordinary and steady. Then her voice came through the doorway, quiet and a little rough at the edges. "I know you can hear me." Caleb set his papers down. "Yes." A pause. "I'm fine." "I know you are." Another pause, longer. "I was thinking about her voice," Dorothy said. "My mother's voice. I can still hear it perfectly. Every word she ever said to me. But I'm scared." She stopped. "I'm scared that someday I won't be able to anymore. That it'll get quieter and quieter, and one day I'll realize I can't remember exactly how it sounded, and then she'll be—" She didn't finish. Caleb stood up. He walked to the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame. Dorothy was at the table, with her back straight and her hands flat on the wood, and her eyes dry now, but red at the corners. "Write it down," he said. She looked at him. "Everything you remember. Her voice, the words she used, the way she laughed, the things she said when she was scared or happy or angry. Write all of it down." He held her gaze. "Put it somewhere safe, somewhere Rose can read it when she's older." Dorothy stared at him. Something behind her eyes shifted, cracked open and rearranged, and came back different. "That's—" She stopped, swallowed. "That's a good idea." "Your mother is in you," he said. "In the way you take care of your brothers and sisters. In the way you think. In the way you hold yourself together. She's not going anywhere." He pushed off the doorframe. "But write it down anyway. For Rose." He went back to his desk. Behind him, after a long moment, he heard Dorothy get up. Heard her open the small drawer where he kept the extra paper and the spare pencil. Heard her sit back down. He didn't look. He just listened to the scratch of pencil on paper, slow and deliberate, and thought about a woman named Ruth Calloway, who had curved her body around her children in the snow and given them everything she had, and about whether she could see them now, all 5 of them, safe and warm inside walls that were beginning, slowly, to feel like home. It was 11 o'clock when he heard the horse outside. Not the movement of his own horses in the barn, a horse on the road, coming up the lane at a pace that said urgency, not courtesy. Caleb was at the door before the knock came, and when he opened it, Whitfield was standing on the porch with snow on his hat and an expression on his face that Caleb had not seen before and did not like. "Something's come up," Whitfield said. Dorothy appeared in the hallway behind Caleb. She had her pencil still in her hand, and her eyes were sharp with the alertness of someone who has learned that when adults speak in that tone of voice at that hour of night, children need to be paying attention. Whitfield looked at Caleb, then at Dorothy, then back at Caleb. "You're going to want to hear this inside." Caleb stepped back from the door. "There's a man," Whitfield said, coming in, knocking snow from his boots. "Arrived on the evening stage. He's been asking around town about the Calloway children since he got off." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "He says his name is Franklin Calloway. He says he's the children's uncle." The pencil in Dorothy's hand snapped. She looked at the 2 halves of it. Then she looked up at Caleb, and what was in her eyes was not fear, not panic, but something harder and more specific than either of those.
the look of someone who has been waiting, somewhere in the back of their mind, for exactly this. Because they have learned that good things do not arrive uncontested, and the only question is always when, never if. Caleb took the document from Whitfield. He read it. He read it again. Then he set it on the table, very carefully, in the same way he set down tools that required careful handling. And he looked at Dorothy and said the only honest thing there was to say. "We knew this was possible," he said. Dorothy's jaw was set. Her spine was straight. Her hands were completely still. "I know," she said. "It doesn't change anything about what we're doing." "I know that too."
She looked at him, and the thing that was in her eyes now was different from anything he'd seen there before. Not the measuring look, not the careful, provisional trust, but something that had moved past calculation into something more absolute. "I know whose house I'm in," she said. "I know who opened the door." Outside, the snow came down. Inside, Caleb Stone looked at a 14-year-old girl with a broken pencil in her hands and the weight of 5 lives on her shoulders, and understood with complete clarity that whatever was coming next, he was not going to let it take them, whatever it cost. Franklin Calloway was staying at McAllister's boarding house, which meant that by morning, every person in Coldwater Creek knew exactly who he was and why he was there. And by mid-morning, the town had divided itself into 2 camps, with the clean, decisive split of a piece of wood along the grain. Caleb knew this because Agnes told him. Agnes knew this because she had gone to Aldridge's Mercantile with the weekly supply list at precisely the right time and had stood in the corner being overlooked the way small, quiet children are overlooked, and had listened to everything. "Mrs. Hargrove says blood is blood and the court will have no choice," Agnes reported, setting her basket on the kitchen table with the brisk efficiency of a field correspondent delivering intelligence. "Mr. Aldridge said something under his breath that I won't repeat. Mrs. Calloway from the Post said that 5 children need a proper family structure, and the single man is not a proper family structure." She paused. "I told her that a single man who feeds you and keeps you warm and learns your name is a better family structure than a blood relative who took 3 months to show up." Dorothy looked up from the stove. "You said that." She was wrong. It needed saying. "Agnes, I was polite about it." Agnes opened her coat and extracted the supply list, now annotated with additional observations in the margins. "I also want to note that Franklin Calloway was seen at breakfast this morning in the boarding house dining room, and 3 separate people described him as appearing sad and genuine, which is not the same as appearing correct." Caleb was at the table, with Fitch's papers spread before him. He had been there since before the children woke. He had not slept. "What did he look like?" he said. Agnes considered this. "Like someone who came a long way for something and isn't sure he deserves it. He has Papa's jaw," she said. And then she picked up her basket and went to put the supplies away, and did not say anything else about it, because Agnes always knew exactly when she had said the necessary thing, and when additional words would only diminish it. The necessary thing, in this case, had already done its work. He has Papa's jaw. Caleb looked at Dorothy across the kitchen. She was stirring something on the stove with her back to the room, her spine straight as ever, and she didn't turn around. But her stirring hand slowed for just a moment and then resumed, and he understood that Agnes's words had landed in her the same way they had landed in him, with the specific weight of something true that no one had wanted to be the first to say. Franklin Calloway was not a villain. That was the hardest part. Caleb rode into town that afternoon and found him sitting on the bench outside McAllister's, hat in his hands, watching the street with the patient, slightly lost expression of a man who has arrived somewhere
and is not sure what the arrival means. He was 45, maybe. Big through the shoulders, the way the Calloway men apparently ran, going gray at the temples, with work-roughened hands and a face that had been outdoors for most of its life. He looked up when Caleb dismounted. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're Stone," Franklin said.
I am. I figured. He looked at Caleb with the careful, measuring attention of a man taking the measure of another man. And Caleb led him, and looked back with the same care. "I'm not here to make trouble," Franklin said. "You filed a legal claim on 5 children I'm in the process of petitioning guardianship over," Caleb said. "That's trouble, whether you intended it or not." Franklin turned his hat over in his hands. I know that." He was quiet for a moment. "I got the letter about Thomas and Ruth in November. Took 3 weeks to reach me. By the time I made arrangements and got on the road..." He stopped. "I'm not making excuses. I'm telling you the timeline." "I'm listening." "I didn't know they were heading to Oregon. Thomas and I didn't write often. We should have. We didn't." His voice carried the particular flatness of a man saying things he has rehearsed to himself many times on a long journey and is now finding inadequate. "The last time I saw those children, Dorothy was 11, Henry was 8, Agnes was 6, Eli was 3. He paused. "I never met Rose." Caleb said nothing. "I'm not claiming I was close to them," Franklin said. "I'm not going to stand in front of you and pretend I was involved in their lives the way a good uncle should have been. I wasn't." His jaw worked. "But Thomas was my brother. He was my only brother. And those children are all I have left of him, and I can't..." His voice broke on the last word, just at the edge of it, and he caught it before it went further. "I can't walk away from that." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not asking you to walk away from it," he said. "I'm asking you to think about what's right for them, not what's right for you." Franklin looked up. "There's a difference," Caleb said. "A big one." He rode home without resolving anything, which was not what he had wanted, but was probably what he should have expected. He told Fitch about the conversation that evening, and Fitch listened, with his pen moving steadily and his expression carefully neutral, and then said what Caleb had already known he was going to say. "The hearing is in 9 days. Judge Harmon rides the circuit, and Coldwater Creek is his next stop." Fitch set his pen down. "Franklin Calloway's lawyer is a man named Voss out of Helena. He's competent, and he's going to argue blood claim with everything he has." He looked at Caleb over his spectacles. "The hearing is going to be difficult." "I know." "Dorothy's testimony is going to be the most important thing in that room." Fitch held his gaze. "Not your character references. Not your income statement. Not anything I say. What she says, and how she says it, and whether Judge Harmon believes she means it. That's what this comes down to." Caleb said nothing. "Does she know that?" "Not yet." "She needs to know." He told her that night, after the younger children were in bed, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with the lamp between them and the cold pressing in at the windows and the quiet of a house full of sleeping children around them. She listened without interrupting, hands flat on the table, face still. When he finished, she said, "So everything depends on what I say." "A great deal of it." "And if I say the wrong thing?" "There's no wrong thing. There's only the truth." He held her gaze. "You tell the truth, and whatever the judge decides is what he decides." "But Dorothy, you can't go in there trying to say what you think they want to hear. Judges hear that every day. They know the difference." Dorothy looked at the lamp. "What if the truth isn't enough?" "It might not be. I'm not going to lie to you about that."
She was quiet for a long time. "He has Papa's jaw," she said finally, quietly.
Not to Caleb, to herself, or to the lamp, or to some private accounting she was running in her head. "I know. He looks like someone Papa would have liked. If things had been different." Her voice was careful. "Papa always said Franklin just needed more time to figure himself out. He wasn't a bad man. Just someone who kept moving when he should have stopped." "Sounds familiar," Caleb said. Dorothy looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. "You stopped," she said. "I did. He didn't. Not until now." She looked back at the lamp. "Is that his fault, or just the way things went?" Caleb didn't answer that, because it wasn't the question that had a useful answer, and Dorothy was smart enough to know it. She was working through something that had nothing to do with the legal question, and everything to do with the harder one. Whether the man downstairs at McAllister's was owed something by virtue of arriving late, and whether owing him something meant she had to pay with the life she was building here. "I don't want to go with him," she said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a statement of fact delivered in the tone of someone who has arrived at a thing after careful examination. "I want to stay here. I want my brothers and sisters to stay here. I want Rose to grow up knowing where home is." She looked at him. I needed to say that out loud, to someone who needed to hear it." "I needed to hear it," Caleb said. She nodded. She stood up. She picked up the lamp and carried it toward the hallway, and stopped. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not making promises you can't keep." She said it with her back to the room. A lot of people make promises they can't keep. It's the ones who don't that you can trust. She went down the hallway without looking back. He sat in the dark for a while after that. The next days moved the way days move when you are waiting for something you cannot control, with excruciating slowness and unbearable speed simultaneously. Caleb worked. Henry worked beside him. Agnes managed the house with her customary precision and sent Constance Hale 2 more notes, both of which received prompt and detailed replies that Agnes kept in her coat pocket with the first one. Eli talked to the horses and to Caleb, and to God apparently, in the barn at night, because Caleb heard him once, a small, serious voice conducting what sounded like a thorough and reasonable negotiation with the divine. Rose had learned to say "stay" and deployed it frequently. She said it to Caleb every morning when he went out to the barn. She said it to Dorothy when Dorothy went to the outhouse. She said it to Henry when he walked to the woodpile. She wrapped her small hand around whatever finger was available and said, "Stay," with the imperious confidence of a 4-year-old who has decided that words are powerful and intends to use them. Caleb always said, "I'm coming back," and always did. Franklin Calloway came to the ranch on the 5th day. He didn't send a message ahead. He rode up the lane in the morning and dismounted at the gate and stood there, not coming through, just standing at the boundary, until Caleb came out. "I'd like to see them," Franklin said. "Not to argue a case, not with a lawyer present, just—" He stopped. "Just to see them." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned back toward the house and raised his voice. "Dorothy!" She appeared in the doorway. She looked at Franklin. Franklin looked at her. "Hello, Dorothy," he said. "Uncle Franklin." Her voice was perfectly neutral. She held the doorframe with one hand. "You've grown." 3 years will do that." He almost smiled. It looked like something Thomas Calloway might have done. Your papa used to say exactly that kind of thing. Straight down the middle, no dressing on it.
His voice was rough. "You've got his way of talking." Something moved across Dorothy's face, quick and uncontrolled, and then gone. "Come in," she said. "The little ones are inside." He came in. Agnes assessed him from the kitchen doorway with the flat, cataloging attention she applied to new variables. Henry stood against the far wall with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Eli came out of the back room and stopped in the middle of the kitchen and stared at Franklin with those wide, serious eyes. "You look like Papa," Eli said. Franklin crouched down. His knees hit the floor with the ease of a man who has spent his life doing physical work, and he looked at Eli eye to eye and said, "He was my big brother. I used to follow him everywhere when we were your age."
Were you friends? Best ones. Eli thought about this. "He was my best friend too," he said. "Him and Mama both." He pressed his fist against the center of his chest in that habitual gesture that Caleb had come to know meant something beyond words. "It still feels like a hole." Franklin's face changed. All the careful control of it changed, and what came through was something that had nothing to do with legal claims or territorial courts. Something raw and real and belonging entirely to a man who has lost his brother and is looking at the last living evidence of him. "I know," Franklin said. "I know that feeling." "Does it change?" Eli asked. "Mr. Caleb said it changes." Franklin looked up at Caleb. A brief look, complicated and unguarded, and then back at Eli. "Your Mr. Caleb is right," he said. "It changes." Rose appeared from the hallway. She looked at Franklin. Franklin looked at Rose. She had never seen him before in her life. She regarded him with the careful attention she gave to new things. Not afraid, not trusting, just assessing. Then she walked over to Caleb and put her arms up. He picked her up without thinking, the way he always did. The motion had become as automatic as breathing. And Rose settled against his shoulder and looked at Franklin from this position of complete security with her mother's brown eyes. Franklin watched this. He watched Caleb hold Rose with the unself-conscious ease of a man who has been doing it long enough that it no longer requires any thought. He watched Rose's hand close around the collar of Caleb's shirt. He watched Henry from across the room, and Agnes in the doorway, and Dorothy standing beside the stove with her arms at her sides and her chin level. He stood up. "Can I speak to you outside?" he said to Caleb. Privately. They stood on the porch in the cold with the door closed behind them, and the sound of the children inside and the wind coming down from the mountains, with that particular Montana edge that cut through everything. "I'm going to say something," Franklin said, "and I need you to hear it without thinking about the hearing. All right?" Franklin looked out at the snow-covered yard. "I came here for the right reasons. I want you to know I believe that." He was quiet for a moment. "I came because Thomas was my brother, and I owed him better than I gave him, and those children are the last thing I can do for him." He turned. "But I didn't come to take them from something good and give them something less." Caleb said nothing. "You didn't take those children in for anything you could get from it," Franklin said. "I can see that. I've been watching it for 20 minutes in there, and I can see exactly what that is." His voice was controlled and deliberate, and cost him something. "My brother he would have liked you. He would have been glad." He stopped. His jaw worked. "He would have been glad you opened the door." "What are you saying?" Caleb said. "I'm saying," Franklin turned his hat over in his hands. "I'm saying I don't know what I'm saying yet. I'm saying I need to think." He looked at Caleb with the direct, uncomplicated honesty of a man who has stopped performing and is simply talking. "I'm saying that Rose put her arms up for you and not for me. And a 4-year-old child doesn't lie about who she trusts.
and I've been doing a lot of thinking about what that means." "The hearing is in 4 days," Caleb said. "I know. Whatever you're thinking, you need to finish thinking it before then." "I know that too." Franklin put his hat on. He moved to the porch steps and stopped. "Can I come back? Not for the hearing, just to see them again. Before." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "Tomorrow afternoon," he said. "Come for supper." Something moved through Franklin's face. Relief, maybe, or the closest thing to it that a man could feel in a situation with no good options, only less bad ones. He nodded once. He went down the steps and mounted his horse and rode back toward town without looking back. Caleb stood on the porch and watched him go. The hearing was in 4 days. Fitch had the papers in order. The references were signed. The statement of income was filed. Dorothy knew what she was going to say. Everything that could be done had been done. And still, standing in the cold with the wind off the mountains and the sound of 5 children inside the house behind him, Caleb felt the specific, precarious fear of a man who has built something worth losing and must now stand in front of a stranger and ask permission to keep it. He pressed his hand against the porch post. Solid, steady, still there. He went inside. Dorothy was at the table with her paper and her pencil, writing.
Not the legal statement. Something else. Something personal. Something she kept separate from the official documents in a fold of brown paper tied with kitchen string. She was writing her mother's voice down. All the words she was afraid of losing. All the things Rose would need to know someday. She didn't look up when he came in, but she said, "He's not a bad man." "No," Caleb said. "He's not." "That doesn't change anything." She turned a page. "But it matters. It matters what kind of man he is." She was quiet for a moment, writing. "It matters that he came." Caleb sat down across from her. "Caleb," she said, still writing. "Yeah." "Whatever the judge says," she paused, chose the next words with the care she gave to everything that mattered. "Whatever he says, I want you to know that you already did it. You already gave us what you were trying to give us." She looked up then, and what was in her eyes was clear and direct and completely without the careful distance she had maintained since the first night. "Even if it ends badly, you already did it." The lamp burned between them. Outside, 4 days away, a judge named Harmon was riding a circuit through the Montana Territory toward a town called Coldwater Creek, carrying in his saddlebag the document that would decide what happened next. Inside, a man and a girl sat at a kitchen table in the lamplight and did not speak about what was coming. Because some things are better faced in the morning, and tonight there was only this: the warmth, the light, the sound of children sleeping, and the particular fragile weight of something that had been built from nothing and was worth, beyond all calculation, fighting for. Franklin came for supper the night before the hearing, and nobody pretended it was just supper. Dorothy made the cornbread because it was something to do with her hands, and Agnes set the table with the precise, deliberate care she brought to things that mattered. And Henry carried the extra chair in from the back room without being asked, and placed it at the table with a firmness that said he had decided something about this evening and intended to see it through. Eli sat across from Franklin and watched him with those steady, serious eyes. And Rose climbed into Caleb's lap the moment he sat down and stayed there, one hand on his forearm, her small weight settled and certain. Franklin watched all of this. He watched it the way a man watches something he is trying to memorize, or something he is trying to understand, or both at once. Nobody talked about the hearing. They talked about Thomas Calloway instead. It started when Eli asked Franklin to tell him something about Papa that nobody else knew. And Franklin looked at the boy for a moment and then laughed. A short, surprised sound, genuine and a little rough.
and said that when Thomas was 12 years old, he had convinced their mother that the family mule had learned to count and had spent 3 weeks training it with sugar cubes before the deception was discovered. Eli's eyes went wide. Did it work? For 3 weeks it worked. Mama showed everyone in town. Papa was so proud of himself he nearly burst. Franklin's voice had the softness of old memory, something worn smooth by long handling. When she found out the truth, she made him muck the stall every morning for a month. He said it was worth it. Agnes looked up from her cornbread. "That's statistically improbable," she said. "A mule cannot learn to count." "I know that," Franklin said. "Thomas knew that. The mule definitely knew that."
He looked at Agnes with something warm and specific in his expression. "Your grandmother did not know that, and that was the entire point." Agnes considered this. "That's actually very clever," she said, with the tone of someone revising an assessment. Dorothy had not said much. She sat at the end of the table and listened to her uncle's stories about her father, with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup and her face doing the thing it did when she was feeling something she was not ready to show. That careful, controlled stillness that Caleb had come to read the way you read weather, by the small signs and not the obvious ones. Her eyes were bright. Her jaw was set. She was taking everything in and holding it close, and not yet decided what to do with it. After the meal, when Eli had gone to check on Clara, and Agnes had quietly taken charge of the dishes, and Henry had disappeared outside for the evening air that he always seemed to need when his feelings got too large for the indoors, Franklin sat across from Dorothy at the table and looked at her directly. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Before tomorrow." Dorothy looked at him, waiting. "I made a lot of choices in my life that I thought were about freedom," Franklin said. "Moving on, not settling, not tying myself to one place or one set of people." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I told myself that was strength, being unattached, not needing anyone." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father tried to tell me, more than once, that I had it backwards, that the bravest thing a man could do was let himself be needed." He looked at his cup. "I didn't listen." Dorothy said nothing, but she was listening completely, in the way she listened to things that mattered, with her whole body still and her whole mind present. "I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for me," Franklin said. "I'm saying it because you deserve to know that coming here wasn't about what I needed. Or it shouldn't have been." His voice was careful and deliberate. "It took me a few days to understand the difference." He looked at her. "But I understand it now." Dorothy was quiet for a long time. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the Montana cold pressed against the windows, and the night was deep and clear. "He talked about you," Dorothy said finally. "Papa. He said you were the funniest person he knew, and the most stubborn, and that you'd figure yourself out eventually. You just needed more time than most." She looked at Franklin steadily. "He believed that. He believed it right up until the end. I know, because he said it 2 weeks before we left Kansas." Franklin's face changed, just completely changed, all the control of it, and what came through was the unguarded grief of a man who has lost his brother and is only now understanding all the things that grief contains, not just the loss of the person, but the loss of the time that could have been and wasn't. "I should have been there," he said, very quietly. "Yes," Dorothy said, "not cruel, just honest. You should have been." He nodded. He accepted that the way it was meant, not as a wound, but as a fact. And facts were things you could do something with. "I can't be there for them the way you are," he said, and now he looked at Caleb, who had been sitting at the far end of the table, quietly present.
The way he was present for things that mattered. Without intruding, without withdrawing, just there. I can see what you've built here, what you've already built in 3 weeks, which is more than some men build in a lifetime. Franklin's voice was direct and without performance.
Thomas would have wanted this for them. Exactly this. He paused. I want this for them too. The room held still around those words. Caleb looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm going to talk to Voss tonight, Franklin said. And I'm going to tell him to withdraw the petition. Dorothy's breath went out of her. Quietly, just a slow exhale, but Caleb heard it. You don't have to do that, Caleb said. I know I don't have to. Franklin stood. He was a big man, and when he stood, he filled the room the way Thomas Calloway might have filled a room. And Caleb understood for the first time completely what Agnes had meant by, he has Papa's jaw. I want to be their uncle, Franklin said. Really be it. Show up when it matters. Write letters. Come visit. Be someone they know. He looked at Dorothy. If you'll allow that. Dorothy looked at him for a long moment. Her face moved through several things, each one carefully, and then settled into something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same country as one. Papa would want that, she said. And I... She stopped, started again. I'd like Rose to know where she comes from. All of them. I'd like them to know the stories. She looked at her hands. I can't give them that. You can. Franklin nodded. He put on his hat. He looked at Caleb one more time, and what passed between them was not friendship yet. It was something earlier than friendship, something that was the ground friendship might eventually grow from. You're a good man, Stone, he said. My brother would have said so. That counts for something. He went out into the cold. The hearing was at 10 o'clock in the morning in the small courthouse that served Coldwater Creek. A single room with 4 rows of benches, a judge's bench at the front, and a wood stove in the corner that kept the temperature at something technically above freezing. Judge Harmon was 60 years old, lean and weathered, with eyes that had the quality of long practice. They did not react to things. They observed them, cataloged them, and rendered judgment in their own time. Caleb sat at the table on the left, with Fitch beside him. Dorothy sat next to Caleb. The younger children were in the back row with Constance Hale, who had arrived early and arranged them with the quiet authority of a woman accustomed to organizing things that mattered. Voss, Franklin's lawyer, sat at the table on the right. Franklin sat beside him and looked at the front of the room and did not look at the Calloway children. Harmon read the documents without expression. He read them the way judges read things, as if the paper itself had no feelings about what was written on it, and neither did he. When he finished, he set them down and looked at the room. The petition for guardianship filed by Caleb Stone, he said, and the competing claim of blood relation filed by Franklin Calloway. He looked at Voss. Counselor. Voss stood and said what he had been paid to say, that blood relation was recognized by territorial law as the primary determinant of custody in cases of orphaned minors, that Franklin Calloway was a man of stable employment and sound character, that the welfare of 5 children required consideration of long-term stability and family connection that a bachelor rancher could not reliably provide. It was a good argument. Caleb could hear that it was a good argument and felt the particular cold that came from hearing someone construct a reasonable case against something you loved. Fitch stood and made the counter-argument. The existing guardianship, the character references, the stability the children had found, the documented evidence of care and provision, the trauma that relocation would cause. Also a good argument. Also reasonable. Also insufficient, Caleb thought, on its own. Then Harmon looked at the back row. I'd like to speak with the children, he said, beginning with Dorothy Calloway. Dorothy walked to the front of the room,
like she had decided exactly how to walk before she stood up, with her spine straight and her chin level and her hands at her sides. Not performing composure, but actually composed, in the way of someone who has made peace with something and no longer has to hold it together because it is already whole. She sat in the chair beside the judge's bench and looked at Harmon directly. "Dorothy," Harmon said. His voice was formal, but not unkind. "You understand the nature of this proceeding."
Yes, sir. You understand that I'm trying to determine what is best for you and your brothers and sisters. Yes, sir. Tell me about Mr. Stone. Dorothy looked at Caleb. Not for permission, not for cues. She looked at him the way you look at the thing you are about to tell the truth about, making sure you see it clearly before you speak. "He opened the door," she said. "That's where it starts. We knocked at 3 in the morning in a Montana blizzard, and he opened the door, and he didn't ask us questions or make us prove we were worth helping. He just said, 'Get inside.'" She paused. "He made us food. He got the fire up. He found blankets. The next morning, before we were awake, he was already writing letters and making plans." She looked at Harmon. "He didn't have to do any of that. We weren't his responsibility. We weren't anything to him except 5 cold children on his porch." Her voice was clear and steady. "He chose us anyway." Harmon made a note. "And your uncle, Mr. Franklin Calloway?" "He's my father's brother," Dorothy said. "He looks like my father, and he tells stories about him that I didn't know and that I needed to hear." She was careful with the next part, choosing each word. "He's a good man. I believe that. But he wasn't there when we needed him. And Mr. Stone was." She held Harmon's gaze. "Being family by blood is something you're born into. Being family by choice is something you have to decide to do every day." She looked at her hands for just a moment, then back up. "Mr. Stone decides it every day. I've watched him." Harmon looked at her for a long time. "What do you want, Dorothy?" Plainly. "I want to stay," she said, plainly. "I want my brothers and sisters to stay. I want Rose to grow up knowing where home is. I want Henry to learn everything Mr. Stone knows about horses, and I want Agnes to have someone who takes her seriously, and I want Eli to—" Her voice softened just slightly on Eli's name. "I want Eli to have someone who answers his questions like they matter, because they do." She straightened. "Mr. Stone does all of those things. He's been doing them since the first morning." Harmon nodded. He looked at the back row. "The younger children." Henry came forward first. He sat in the chair like he had decided how he was going to sit before he stood up. Straight, controlled, nothing wasted. He looked at the judge. "He showed me how to stack wood for Montana winter," Henry said, when Harmon asked him about Caleb. "Sounds simple. It's not. It's about knowing the specific place you're in and what it needs." He looked at his hands on his knees. "He doesn't just teach me things. He teaches me why things are the way they are." His jaw worked. "My father was going to teach me farming. I don't know anything about Oregon farming now, but I know Montana." He looked up. "I want to know Montana." Agnes sat in the chair with the direct, matter-of-fact composure of someone who has prepared testimony and intends to deliver it accurately. She told Harmon about the inventory, about the candles and the root vegetables and the supply calculations. And then she stopped cataloging and said, in a completely different voice, younger, quieter, the voice of a 9-year-old instead of a field general, "My mother said a woman who can count and plan will never be at anyone's mercy. Mr. Stone is the first adult who heard me say that and said she was right." She looked at Harmon. "He means it when he listens to me. That's not common." Eli climbed into the chair and looked at the judge and said,
He told me it feels like a hole, and that it changes. He told me the honest thing instead of the easy thing. He pressed his fist to his chest in that familiar gesture. Papa used to do that. Tell the honest thing. He looked at Caleb. I want to stay where the honest people are.
Rose would not come forward without Caleb. This was stated simply by Constance Hale and accepted by the room as the evidence it was. Harmon looked at the room for a long moment. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Franklin, who was sitting at his table with his hands flat before him and his face completely open. No argument in it, no performance. Just a man waiting for what was right to be decided. Then Harmon picked up his pen. I've reviewed the documentation and heard the testimony, he said. The character references are substantial. The evidence of care and provision is clear and consistent. He wrote something. I note that the competing claimant, Mr. Franklin Calloway, has not presented his case today through his counsel, which I interpret as a withdrawal of the competing petition. Voss stood. That is correct, Your Honor. Mr. Calloway has withdrawn his petition as of this morning. Harmon nodded as though this confirmed something he had already understood. He looked at Caleb. Mr. Stone, you understand that guardianship of 5 minor children is a permanent legal commitment, requiring consistent provision for their physical, educational, and moral welfare. I understand, Caleb said. You understand that this is not temporary and cannot be abandoned when circumstances become difficult. I understand. And you are prepared to make this commitment formally and completely before this court. I am, Caleb said. And his voice, when he said it, was the simplest and most certain thing he had said in 4 years. Not performed certainty, not constructed certainty, but the real kind. The kind that comes from knowing something completely because you have already been doing it, and you already know what it costs, and you have already decided the cost is worth it. Harmon looked at him for one more moment. Then he brought the gavel down. Guardianship of Dorothy, Henry, Agnes, Eli, and Rose Calloway is granted to Caleb Stone. The court finds this arrangement to be in the best interest of the children in all material respects. Another stroke of the pen. This ruling is final. The room released, not loudly, not with cheering or theatrics. Just the specific quiet release of a room full of people who have been holding their breath and have now been given permission to exhale. Constance Hale put her hand over her mouth. Agnes made a small sound that she would later attribute to a cough. Henry put his face down for just a moment, just long enough, and when he brought it back up, it was composed again. But his eyes were red at the corners, and he did not look at anyone while he blinked them clear. Eli said thank you to the ceiling, quiet and sincere, and apparently addressed to someone specific. Rose said Kayeb and held up her arms. He crossed the room and picked her up, and she put her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes with the absolute, unqualified satisfaction of a child who has gotten exactly what she decided she needed. Dorothy stood beside him. She did not throw her arms around him. That was not who she was, and he knew that. And it would never be who she was, and that was all right. She stood beside him and looked at the judge's bench and let out one long, slow breath. And then she turned and looked at Caleb with those brown eyes that had been emptied out and were now, slowly, filling back up with something. Not innocence. That was gone and was not coming back. But something better suited to the person she was becoming. Something that could hold both grief and gladness at once, without one canceling the other out. Okay, she said. That was all. Just that one word. But the way she said it, like a door closing on what was behind and a window opening on what was ahead, made it enough. Franklin was waiting outside on the courthouse steps. He had his hat in his hands, and the cold around him, and the expression of a man who has done the right thing and is not yet certain how it feels.
Dorothy went to him first. She stopped in front of him and looked up at him. This man who had her father's jaw, and her father's stories, and her father's eyes when he laughed, and said, "Come for Christmas, if you can." Franklin looked at her. Something moved through his face that had no name in any language, but was understood by everyone watching. "I'll come for Christmas," he said. "And write," she said. "Papa would want you to write." "I'll write." She nodded once, and then she went down the steps and toward the wagon without looking back. Because Dorothy Calloway had learned to walk toward what was next. Caleb looked at Franklin. "Thank you," he said. Simple, without elaboration. The words meaning exactly what they said, and nothing more, and nothing less.
Franklin put his hat on. "Take care of them," he said. "All 5.
"I will." Franklin turned and walked back toward McAllister's, and Caleb watched him go the way you watch something that has been settled. Not with relief exactly, but with the particular stillness that comes after a long wait has been set down. He turned to the wagon. All 5 of them were in it. Henry up front holding the reins with the focused attention of a boy who had been practicing and wanted Caleb to know it. Agnes in the middle, with her coat buttoned and her inventory notebook already open. Eli, standing up in the back, arms out for balance, grinning at the sky with the uninhibited joy of a 6-year-old who has been told that the good thing is actually going to stay. Dorothy beside him, one hand on his coat to keep him from falling, her face turned toward the road ahead. Rose in the front, with her arms stretched toward Caleb. "Kaeb," she said. "Home." He climbed up onto the bench. He took the reins from Henry, who relinquished them with the slightly grudging expression of a boy who had wanted to drive home, but understood that some moments belonged to someone else. The horses moved forward, steady and unhurried, through the cold Montana air and the thin winter light. The road back to the ranch was the same road it had always been. Same frozen ruts, same bare trees, same mountains in the distance going white against the pale sky. But it felt different in the way that roads feel different when you know where you are going, and you know what is waiting for you when you get there. Nobody spoke for a while. The horse's breath came in white clouds. The wagon creaked. Agnes made a note in her book. Eli hummed something tuneless and cheerful. Rose held Caleb's arm with both hands. Then Henry said without looking up, "I'd like to learn to drive the wagon. Properly. On a schedule." "Monday mornings," Caleb said. Henry nodded, satisfied, as though this had been a negotiation and he had come out well. "I've revised the spring planting calculations," Agnes said, still writing. "Based on the size of the property and available labor, I believe we can be self-sufficient in root vegetables by next fall, if we start the beds in April." "Show me the numbers," Caleb said. Agnes looked up with the expression of someone who has been waiting to be asked that exact question. "I have them right here." Dorothy looked at the road ahead. She had her mother's brown paper in her coat pocket, folded and tied with kitchen string, full of her mother's voice, written down for Rose, all the things she was afraid of losing. She touched the pocket once, just checking, and then put her hand back in her lap. "Caleb," Eli said from the back. "Yeah? Is this what it feels like? When the whole starts to change?" Caleb thought about that. He thought about 4 years of a life built around the principle of not caring enough to hurt. He thought about a knock that sounded like something breaking. He thought about small, wet boot prints on his floor, and an empty plate slid across a table, and a 4-year-old's arms held up in the absolute certainty of being caught. He thought about Henry's shoulders when he said together, about Agnes's coat pocket full of things she kept because they mattered, about Dorothy writing her mother's voice down so Rose would know it someday.
He thought about what it meant to stay, and what it cost, and why the cost was not a reason not to. "Yeah," he said, "this is what it feels like." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, "I like it." "Me too," Caleb said. The wagon turned onto the north road, and the ranch came into view. The barn leaning slightly east the way it always had. The house with the lamp already lit in the window, because Dorothy had left it burning that morning. The woodpile that Henry had stacked correctly and would stack again tomorrow. The fence line stretching toward the mountains that were already going dark with the early winter dusk. Home. Not the place he had come to 4 years ago, with a horse and a grief too large to name. Not the land he had worked to keep from feeling anything. Something else now. Something he had not built alone. Rose pointed at the house. "Home," she said again. Certain and complete and without question. The way 4-year-olds say the truest things. "Home," Caleb agreed. He brought the horses to a stop in the yard, and the children climbed down the way they had learned to climb down. Henry first to help the younger ones. Agnes stepping carefully with her notebook tucked under her arm. Eli jumping the last foot with his arms out. Dorothy lifting Rose and carrying her the way she had carried her down 12 miles of mountain road in a blizzard, fierce and steady and not letting go. Caleb stood in the yard and watched them go inside, one by one, into the light and warmth of the house. And he stood there for a moment in the cold. The same cold that had tried to take 5 children and had failed because one door had opened. And felt something he had not felt since the morning he had knelt in the dirt of a Missouri cemetery, and understood that the future was a thing he would have to rebuild from nothing. He felt ready. Not for easy things, not for a life without grief or hardship or the specific weight of 5 children depending on him to get more things right than wrong, but ready in the way that matters, ready to stay, ready to show up, ready to let it cost him what it cost him, and keep going anyway. He went inside. Dorothy was at the stove. Agnes was at the table with her calculations. Henry was hanging his coat with the deliberate care of someone who has decided his things belong in a particular place and intends to keep them there. Eli was talking to Clara through the window, which was a thing he did and would probably always do. Rose was on the kitchen floor with her blanket, already half asleep, trusting completely that the world would be the same good thing when she woke up. Caleb hung his coat beside Henry's. He sat down at the table. Agnes slid her calculations across to him without looking up. "The April beds," she said. "Tell me what you think." He looked at the numbers. They were precise, thorough, and almost entirely correct. "You'll want to account for the north slope," he said. "Gets less sun. The yield calculations need adjusting." Agnes looked at the paper, looked at him, made a note. "Revised," she said. Dorothy set a cup of coffee on the table beside his elbow, the way she had started doing without comment 2 weeks ago. Just there, just present, just the small, ordinary language of a person who has decided that someone belongs in their life and is acting accordingly. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me for what's decent," she said, and she almost smiled when she said it, because she knew he would recognize the words. And he did. Outside, the Montana night came down hard and cold and absolute. The mountains disappeared into the dark. The stars came out one by one over the prairie, cold and distant and burning. The same stars that had hung over the pass above Miller's Ridge the night Thomas and Ruth Calloway had curved their bodies around 5 sleeping children and given everything they had. Inside the house on the North Road, in the warmth and the lamplight, a man and 5 children sat down to supper. They had been 5 strangers in a blizzard,
and one man who almost didn't open the door. Now they were something that had no better word than family. Chosen, built, hard-won, and real. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.